The sun rose over the cracked sidewalks of West Baltimore, its heat already pressing down on the concrete like a weight, but no one noticed it quite like Davion. He was only 14, yet he moved like someone who had lived through too many seasons. His feet were bare, his shirt clung to his small frame with dried sweat and city dust, and he carried a torn-up sack slung over one shoulder like it held the weight of the world. Inside were bent cans, smashed bottles, and a few rusted wires, everything he could find rummaging through alleys, gutters, and the backs of restaurants. His stomach growled in protest, louder than the city noise around him, but Davion kept walking, always looking, always hoping for something he could trade for food. That morning, he had woken up on the edge of a loading dock behind an old liquor store. The cold from the night had crept into his back and legs, and the ache was still there, dull and steady, as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes and got to work. He moved slowly at first, legs stiff, knees reluctant, but he smiled to himself when he found a pair of aluminum trays behind a catering van. Maybe he'd get enough for a slice of pizza today. Maybe. The market near Fulton Street was already buzzing by the time he arrived. Vendors shouted prices, kids weaved through the crowd with juice boxes. People brushed past him like he didn't exist. Davion approached the first stall, a woman selling roasted peanuts. "Ma'am, do you have anything you don't need?" he asked in a voice soft as paper. She didn't even look at him. "Keep moving. Ain't got time for beggars," she muttered. He nodded politely and stepped back. The next vendor, tomatoes stacked like rubies, gave him only a sneer. A man selling bread waved him off before he could even speak. No one had anything. No one saw him. He tried again and again and again, each time with the same result: rejection in 100 forms. His stomach twisted in knots, and his mouth was dry like sandpaper. Still, he did not cry. Near the banana stand, a group of boys his age laughed over ears of roasted corn, their hands greasy and mouths full. One of them dropped a chunk of corn onto the ground and didn't pick it up. Davion waited until they walked off, then crouched slowly, picked up the half-eaten piece and wiped the dirt with the edge of his shirt. Just as he was about to raise it to his mouth, a dog bolted past, grabbed it from his hand, and disappeared into the crowd. Davion didn't scream. He didn't chase the dog. He just sat down on the warm concrete under a wobbly wooden table, hugged his knees to his chest, and whispered, "Maybe the trash will feed me today." He stood up again, heavier now in his heart than in his legs, and walked to the back of a small restaurant where he knew the garbage was dumped around noon. The stench was thick and buzzing with flies, but to him it was a buffet of second chances. He dug carefully through the bags, lifting lids and brushing away napkins until he found a plastic bowl of rice and beans, barely touched and not yet spoiled. His eyes lit up like it was treasure. He rinsed the food quickly under a leaky pipe and then settled under a sycamore tree growing sideways from the cracked sidewalk. His hands shook as he opened the bowl, his body eager. He raised the first spoonful to his lips when he heard it, a thud. Not trash, not a rat, something heavier. He turned his head and saw her, a woman collapsed by the dumpster, her dress stained with dust, her face slick with sweat. She was holding her stomach, which was round and full, pregnant, very pregnant. Davion froze for a second, torn between hunger and instinct. Then he dropped the spoon, bowl still half full, and ran to her. "Ma'am," he said, kneeling beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered. Her lips were cracked and dry. Her skin was warm like the sidewalk. She didn't answer. Davion looked around. People moved on the other side of the street, oblivious, phones in hand, shopping bags swaying. No one saw her. No one saw him. He knelt beside her, his knees pressing into gravel, and took her hand, which felt limp and cold. He glanced back at the food he had just rinsed, the only thing he had. He didn't hesitate long. Using a corner of a plastic wrapper, he scooped small bits of rice and brought them gently to her lips. "Please, just eat a little," he whispered. "You gotta eat. Your baby needs it." Slowly, with effort, she opened her mouth. He fed her carefully, tenderly, the way he wished someone had once fed him. Tears slipped from her closed eyes. When she could finally speak, she asked, "Why would you help me?" Her voice was a ghost. Davian smiled, faint but real. "Because I know what it's like to be hungry, and I don't want your baby to feel that." She cried harder, but the tears looked lighter this time. He helped her sit up, dabbed her forehead with the edge of his shirt, and waited as she caught her breath. "My name is Melanie," she said after a long pause. "I'm Davian," he replied. She reached into her worn purse and pulled out a folded business card, still clean. She placed it in his hand. "If you ever need help, come find me." He stared at the letters, couldn't read them all, but he held it like gold. He helped her up, watched her walk away slowly into the market crowd, her hand on her belly, her eyes shining. When she vanished from view, he looked back at the empty food bowl still smeared with beans. His stomach screamed, but his heart whispered, "Maybe I did good today." He picked up his sack, tucked the business card into the deepest pocket, and walked back into the noise of the city. Back to survival. Back to the street. But this time with something he'd never had before: hope. And he didn't know that years later it would be that hope, that small act of quiet courage that would save his life when no one else could. Not yet. Not now. But the circle had already begun. The wind whispered through the alley behind Mercy General Hospital as the ambulance doors slammed shut and the driver shouted into his radio, his voice tense but fading fast behind the screech of gurney wheels on tile. Inside, under the cold fluorescent lights, Davian lay motionless, blood matting the curls above his temple, chest barely rising under the pale blue sheet. He had been hit hard, bones bent at odd angles, one shoe missing, his sack of bottles shredded and forgotten somewhere on the asphalt where the accident happened. The nurses moved quickly, cutting through his tattered shirt, wiping the blood from his face, checking vitals and shouting for oxygen. No ID, no family, no phone, just a card, folded and smudged, crumpled tight in the curve of his palm like a secret he refused to let go of. Someone took it, glanced at the name, placed it on the clipboard. Then they moved on. In another wing of the hospital, Melanie was finishing her rounds. Her white uniform was creased, her hair pulled back into a tight bun that didn't hide the weariness in her eyes. She had spent the last 3 hours checking charts, adjusting IVs, smiling through exhaustion, and holding the hands of dying strangers. But nothing about today felt strange. It was just another Monday, another battle against pain, against silence, against systems that moved too slow for the people who needed them most. She walked briskly down the hall, ready to clock out, her feet aching in her sneakers, until she turned the corner and a young resident called out, "We just got a hit-and-run victim, no ID, but he's maybe 15, small frame, still unconscious." Melanie nodded, about to keep walking when something tugged at her, a quiet pull in the ribs, the kind she'd learned to listen to long ago. She changed direction and stepped into the ER bay. Then she saw him. The moment was almost unreal. His face was thinner, older, the dirt on his cheeks wiped away, but his eyes, though closed as eyelashes, The curve of his jaw, the quiet, gentle slope of his hand still gripping nothing she knew. The world spun just slightly. Her breath caught in her throat. Her knees wobbled. "What's his name?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The nurse next to her shrugged. "No ID, just this card." She took it and stared. It was hers, the same card she had given away years ago in a moment she never forgot. Her hands trembled. "Let me take this one," she said softly. "Please, I'll be responsible for him." The others looked up, surprised, but nodded. She was senior staff. She never asked for favors. She was calm, methodical, and precise, but not today. She placed her hand on his chest and whispered, "You gave me life when I had nothing. Now let me fight for yours." The next few hours passed in a blur of antiseptic, alarms, and whispered prayers. Melanie refused to leave his side. She cleaned his wounds with care, stitched the gash on his brow herself, fed him through a tube, and wiped his face every hour like a mother would. When her shift ended, she stayed. When the other nurses rotated out, she stayed. When the lights dimmed in the ward and the night shift took over, she was still there. Her chair pulled close, a blanket over her shoulders, his hand wrapped in hers. Her daughter Zuri called at one point, and she spoke gently over the phone. "I'll be home tomorrow, baby. I just need to help someone special tonight." She thought about that day, years ago, behind the dumpster in Baltimore. She had fallen hard, weak from hunger, betrayed by the man she had loved blindly. When she left her husband's mansion, pregnant and alone, she thought she might die in the street. Her accounts were frozen, her phone deactivated, her name erased from the driver's list. That bowl of rice Davion had given her was the only thing she had eaten in 2 days. And he, just a boy with nothing, had offered it without hesitation. His hands had shaken, his voice quiet, but the care in his eyes, she would never forget that. It was the moment she decided to live. She had found a women's shelter the next day. Slowly, she built herself back up, step by step. Nursing school, night shifts, then Zuri, then a job at Mercy. But through it all, she never stopped thinking about that boy with dust on his face and fire in his heart. Now he lay before her again, broken but breathing, and she wouldn't let him go. By the third night, he stirred, just a twitch in his fingers at first, then a flicker behind his eyelids. Melanie leaned closer, heart hammering. "Davion?" she whispered. He blinked once, then again, his mouth parted, voice scratchy. "Where am I?" She smiled through tears. "You're safe. You're at a hospital. You were hurt, but you're okay now." He turned his head, slow as dawn. His gaze met hers, unfocused. I know you." She nodded, eyes burning. "Yes, you do." He frowned faintly. "You were pregnant, behind the restaurant." She reached for his hand. "And you gave me your only meal." He looked down at her fingers holding his, then back into her eyes. "I never forgot." Neither did she. Over the next few days, she stayed with him. She brought soup in thermoses, taught him how to sit up without hurting his ribs, and read to him at night from children's books in soft, calming tones. She even trimmed his hair, combed it back gently like she did for Zuri on Sundays. When doctors passed by, they'd raise their brows. "Family?" they'd ask. She'd just smile and say, "He's someone who gave me everything when I had nothing." Davion didn't talk much, but when he did, it was honest, raw. "I never thought I'd sleep in a real bed," he said one night. "Not one with sheets, not like this." She squeezed his hand. "You deserve every bit of it." On the 5th morning, the doctor gave his approval. "He's strong enough now," he told her. "We'll need the bed soon. Discharge him tomorrow if there's no one to claim him." Milani looked at Davion, who sat up in bed with his knees drawn to his chest, eyes wide and uncertain. She walked into the room holding a small brown paper bag with a sandwich, an apple, and a note. He didn't look at the food. Where do I go now?" he asked. The question didn't surprise her. It broke her heart anyway. She knelt beside the bed and brushed a wrinkle from the corner of his blanket. "You come with me," she said. "Home?" His brow furrowed. "You mean, to your house?" She nodded. "Yes, Davion. My daughter's waiting. You'll meet her, and I'll make sure you never have to sleep outside again." That night, they rode in silence through the city. He wore a fresh shirt, slightly too big, and shoes that didn't pinch. He stared out the window like the world had changed shapes. When they pulled up to her apartment complex, he hesitated at the door. Milani placed a hand on his back. "It's okay," she whispered. Inside was a small, tidy space filled with warm smells and brighter colors than Davion had ever seen. There were framed photos, books on the shelves, drawings taped to the fridge. A small girl with tight curls and wide eyes peeked from behind a doorway. "Mommy, who's that?" she asked shyly. Milani smiled and held out her arms. "Come here, Zuri. This is Davion. A long time ago, before you were born, he saved us." Zuri blinked and walked up to him slowly. "You saved Mommy?" He nodded, unsure what to say. She wrapped her arms around his waist and whispered, "Thank you." Davion couldn't move. He had never been hugged like that, never been thanked by a child who looked up to him like a hero. He glanced at Milani, who was crying again, silently. Is she the baby?" he asked, voice trembling. "The one from the alley?" Milani nodded. "Her name's Zuri. It means beautiful in Swahili. She's alive because of you." Davion closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he wasn't on the outside of a window looking in. He was home. Davion woke to the smell of something warm and soft drifting through the air like a memory he wasn't sure he ever had. It was cinnamon, maybe, or brown sugar, and it wrapped around him before his eyes had even opened. For a moment, he panicked, disoriented by the feeling of a mattress beneath him, of a ceiling that didn't leak and sheets that didn't smell like mildew. His hand gripped the blanket tightly, almost afraid that if he moved too fast, it would all vanish like a dream. But the light coming in from the window was gentle, not harsh, and the sound of quiet laughter from the other room grounded him. He sat up slowly, muscles still aching from the accident but a little stronger than the day before. His feet touched the carpet, soft under his toes, and he exhaled for the first time like it was safe to breathe. The door creaked open just slightly, and Zuri's little head peeked in. She grinned and said, "Breakfast ready. Mommy made waffles." Then she darted away, curls bouncing. Davion stood, pulled on the oversized hoodie Milani had given him, and followed the sound of plates clinking and the hum of morning. The kitchen was small but bright, filled with the smells of butter and syrup, and Milani moved gracefully between the stove and the sink, humming a tune Davion didn't know but liked anyway. She turned when she heard him and smiled, not the kind of smile people fake when they feel sorry for you, but the kind that said you belonged. "You hungry?" she asked. Davion nodded, quietly taking a seat at the table where Zuri had already placed 3 forks, 3 cups, and a single flower in a jar like it was a feast. He didn't speak much that morning, just ate slowly, watching them, absorbing the way they lived, how they joked and cleaned and filled the space with something he could only describe as safety. After breakfast, he offered to wash the dishes, hands unsure but willing. Milani didn't stop him. She only stood nearby in case he didn't know where the soap was. The days passed like that, slower than the city outside. In the mornings, Davian helped sweep the small porch and water the plants. In the afternoons, he and Zuri walked to the corner store, or sat in the living room going over letters and numbers from her school books. At night, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the silence that now felt like peace instead of punishment. He began to talk more, to laugh occasionally, to stop flinching when someone raised their voice on the street outside. He learned to fold his clothes, to set the table, to heat water for tea. He even started reading aloud to Zuri, stumbling at first, but getting better every day. One afternoon, Milani sat beside him on the sofa and handed him a notebook. "Write whatever you want," she said. "Stories, dreams, your name, anything. This is yours." Davion stared at the blank page for a long time before finally pressing the pen down. D-A-V. He paused, then kept going. Davion. He smiled. But even as life settled into a rhythm, a shadow of uncertainty lingered at the edge of his thoughts. One evening, while they were eating soup on the couch, he asked Milani, "What happens next?" She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He looked down at his bowl. "I mean, I can't stay forever, right? I'm not your son. I don't go to school. I don't belong here." Milani reached out and touched his hand gently. "Davion, you belong anywhere someone wants you to feel safe. And this is your home now, as long as you want it to be." He blinked hard, swallowing the knot in his throat. "But I don't know how to be normal. I've never had a family before." She smiled. "Neither did I. Not really. Until you." He didn't know what to say to that. So he nodded and let her words sit inside his chest like a warm stone. A week later, she came home from work with a folded pamphlet and a gleam in her eye. "I spoke to a friend," she said. "He runs a recycling center downtown. He remembers what it's like to grow up rough. He said he's willing to give you a job. It's part-time. Sorting. But it's a start." Davion stared at her, eyes wide. "A job?" She nodded. "A real one, with a name tag and a paycheck and a chance to build something." His hands trembled as he took the paper. He had never thought about work that didn't involve garbage bags and shouting men at scrap yards. Do you think I can do it?" he asked. Milani's voice didn't waver. "I know you can." On his first day, he wore a collared shirt Zuri had picked out and shoes that Milani had found at a thrift store. She packed him a lunch in a paper bag and kissed his forehead before he left, like a mother sending her son to school. The center was loud and busy, filled with clanking machines and the sour smell of old plastic. But Davion focused, learned fast, and never complained. His manager, a tall man with rough hands named Jerome, took to him quickly. "You work hard," he said on the third day. "You remind me of me when I was your age, only you smile more." Davion grinned. "I smile because I have something to come home to now." Each evening, he returned to the apartment with stories for Zuri and updates for Milani. He told them about the types of plastic, the categories of scrap, the way the machines worked. They listened, not out of obligation, but pride. He started writing more in his notebook, not just his name, but full sentences, poems, memories, even dreams. He wrote about the night sky from under the bridge, about the way it felt to hear your own name called like it mattered, about the sound of someone saying, "Welcome home." One Sunday, Melanie brought out a small cake with candles and said, "It's your birthday now. We're going to celebrate the day your second life began." Davion laughed, then cried, then blew out the candles while Zuri sang off key. He had never celebrated a birthday before. Never had anyone bake something just for him. That night, lying in bed, he whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular, or maybe to God, or maybe to the part of himself that had chosen kindness that day behind the restaurant. He didn't know which, but he meant it. And so the days became weeks, and weeks became months. Davion got better at work. He got better at reading. He learned to cook one dish, then two. He stopped waking up in the middle of the night gasping for air. He still carried the past, but not like chains anymore, more like a story he could finally choose how to tell. One morning, Zuri asked him, "Will you always live with us?" And he answered, "If you'll always have me." She hugged him so tightly that it felt like yes. What Davion didn't know, yet what none of them knew, was that the past had one more shadow waiting just around the corner. But for now, in the soft safety of a home built on grace, he was healing. And he was not alone. The sun was just beginning to rise behind the skyline of Atlanta when Davion stepped out of the recycling center with his uniform still smudged from the day before. He had volunteered for the overnight shift to help Jerome cover a scheduling gap, and now his arms ached and his shirt clung to his back, but he felt something close to contentment humming in his chest. The city was quieter at this hour, softer, like it had not yet remembered its noise. He walked home slowly, stopping at the bakery on the corner to pick up a loaf of day-old bread that he knew Zuri liked toasted with honey. It was wrapped in paper and still warm when he reached their apartment. Melanie opened the door before he knocked, still in her robe, with sleep creasing her face and love written across her eyes. "You didn't have to," she said softly. "I wanted to," he replied, handing her the bread. She kissed his cheek and whispered, "You are becoming more yourself every day." That weekend, the center held a small appreciation event for staff, inviting local partners and supporters to tour the facility. Jerome asked Davion to give a part of the welcome tour. "You've got a good voice," he said, "and people listen when you talk." Davion hesitated at first, but agreed. On the day of the event, he stood near the entrance, straightening his name badge for the 5th time and smoothing out the collar of the shirt Melanie had ironed that morning. Zuri had drawn him a good luck card that he kept folded in his pocket. The first group arrived at 10 a.m. sharp, a small gathering of business owners and city officials, most of them strangers. But one man stood out immediately. He was tall, dressed in a pale gray suit that looked like it cost more than the recycling center's rent, with shoes that clicked sharply on the floor and a face Davion didn't recognize, but Melanie did. She had come to drop off a donation of school supplies that morning, Zuri skipping at her side when she froze mid-step. Davion saw the shift in her posture, the way her shoulders tightened, the color drained from her face, the breath that caught in her throat. "What is it?" he asked. She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the man who had just walked through the double doors and started shaking hands like he owned the room. Obasi. She hadn't seen him in almost a decade, not since he had dismissed her with the flick of a wrist, telling her to leave if she didn't like being second to his secret family. Not since he had frozen her accounts, silenced her calls, and watched her walk out of the mansion, pregnant and alone. He looked older now, maybe heavier, maybe more tired around the eyes, but still powerful, still used to command in a room. He had no idea Meilani was there, no idea she was part of this place now, and certainly no idea that the young man he had just nodded politely at Davion was the same boy who had once saved the woman he had discarded. Davion glanced between them, and it took him only a moment to understand. "That's him," Meilani whispered. "That's Zuri's father." Her voice was steady, but fragile like glass. Davion's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists, but Meilani touched his shoulder gently. "Don't. Not here. Not like this." He nodded, but something inside him trembled. The tour began. Davion led it like a professional, showing the guests the sorting lines, the machines, the data on reduced landfill waste. Obasi watched with a vaguely approving nod, likely impressed but distant. Near the end, he turned to Jerome. "This one's sharp," he said, gesturing at Davion. "You ever think of grooming him for something higher?" Before Jerome could reply, Davion looked him in the eye and said quietly, "I'm already being groomed for something higher. It's called becoming a good man." Obasi blinked but let it slide with a businessman's shrug. After the tour, as people milled about, sipping coffee and nibbling pastries, he approached Davion again. "Tell me, son," he said, "where do you see yourself in 5 years?" Davion hesitated, then said, "I see myself living with dignity, providing for my family, and never abandoning them." Obasi tilted his head. "That's a big answer for someone so young." Davion stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Big enough to recognize the man who left my second mother in the street when she needed him most." Obasi's face changed, just slightly. Enough. Davion didn't give him time to respond. "You may not remember her, Meilani. She remembers you. So does Zuri. But I'm the one who stayed, and I'm the one who'll be here tomorrow." He turned and walked away. Zuri met him halfway with a juice box and a paper flower she made in school. "Can we go now?" she asked. "I want to show you my new book." He nodded and looked over his shoulder one last time. Obasi was still standing there, stunned silent among the smiles and applause. Back at home that evening, Meilani tucked Zuri into bed and joined Davion on the couch, where he was flipping through her old nursing textbooks out of curiosity. "You didn't have to say anything," she said softly. He nodded. "But I wanted to. You gave me a voice. I used it." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You used it well." In the weeks that followed, things didn't change on the surface, but everything felt different underneath. Davion walked taller, laughed more often, and began tutoring Zuri with more confidence. He applied for his GED program with Jerome's help. He even gave a short talk at a local youth center about resilience, where he told part of his story leaving out names but not truths. "Kindness," he said, "is not about how much you have. It's about what you're willing to give, even when you have almost nothing." The room was silent. Then someone stood and clapped. Then another. Then all of them. That night, back in his room, Davion took out his old notebook. He flipped past the early pages filled with jagged letters and simple drawings. Then he turned to a blank page and wrote in smoother strokes, "I was a boy with no bed, no shoes, no name. But someone saw me, and I saw someone else. And now I am a man who wakes up to the sound of laughter, the smell of cinnamon, and the warmth of a little girl calling me Big Brother. This is what grace looks like. This is what home feels like. This is what a second chance can build." He closed the book and placed it on the shelf next to Zuri's fairy tale collections. Then he turned off the light, climbed into his bed with clean sheets and a quiet heart, and let the darkness cradle him like it had never been cruel.